The darkness underground was total, not the kind of darkness a person finds in a room with the shutters closed or out on a moonless night. This was a pressure, a weight of black air that pushed back against the tiny flame of an oil lamp and almost seemed to breathe on its own. The heat was wet and close. The smell was sulfur and rock dust, and the sour edge of unwashed bodies that had not seen open daylight for days. The ceiling of the tunnel was no higher than the top of a child's head. In many places, it was lower than that, and that was exactly the point. The Roman Empire, in the 2nd century before the Common Era, controlled vast stretches of land that the modern world would recognize as Spain and Portugal. The Romans called it Hispania. They had fought long and bloody wars to claim it, and the reason was not simply glory or territory. It was silver and lead and copper. Buried deep in the red hills of the Iberian Peninsula were some of the richest mineral deposits in the ancient world, and the Romans intended to take every ounce of it out of the ground. At the height of the Republic's power, the mining district near the city of Carthago Nova, what is today Cartagena in southern Spain, employed more than 40,000 slaves. Writers of that era described this openly, without discomfort, the way a man might describe the number of cattle in a field. Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian writing in the 1st century before the Common Era, traveled to the region and recorded what he saw. He described the underground shafts as endless labyrinths, passages cut by hand through solid rock, the air inside them thick with dust, the heat suffocating. He wrote that the slaves who worked these mines had no hope of ever seeing the open sky again. What Diodorus Siculus did not write, and what the historical record only slowly reveals, is who was most often sent into the narrowest passages, who was assigned to the galleries where a grown man's shoulders would not fit, who carried the lamp into the places where the rock closed in tight enough to press against both walls at once. His name was Hanno. That much, at least, is a reasonable guess. Many of the enslaved children who worked the Roman mines of Hispania came from North African and Iberian communities that the Roman military had conquered and broken apart. Boys like Hanno were taken young, sometimes captured directly in raids, sometimes sold by families with no other way to survive, sometimes purchased at the large slave markets in Carthago Nova at the age of 7 or 8, chosen specifically for their size. Small meant useful. Small meant employable in places where larger bodies could not go. Hanno was bought sometime around his 8th year. He was small for his age, which in the world he had just entered was considered a quality worth paying for. He spoke no Latin when he arrived. He learned the words he needed over the following weeks, the words for oar, for basket, for move, and for faster. Beyond those, he did not need many others. He had a mother somewhere behind him, older brothers, a village in the green hills of North Africa where cook fires burned in the evening and animals settled noisily into sleep. Within weeks of his arrival at the mines, those memories had begun to feel like something that had happened to a different person entirely. The mine had its own rhythms, its own sounds, its own demands, and they had no patience for anything a child might carry in from outside. He was given a small lamp made of fired clay, filled with olive oil. He was given a pick with an iron head no bigger than a man's closed fist. He was shown the entrance to the shaft, a black rectangle cut into the hillside at roughly the height of a child's chest, barely wide enough to pass through sideways. An overseer gestured into the darkness. Hanno went in. The work inside those mines was not complicated. It required no training beyond basic instruction. It required no skill that could not be demonstrated in an hour. It required only that the body be small enough to fit, that the arms could swing without the ceiling stopping them, and that the lungs could manage what passed for air in the deepest galleries long enough to fill a basket and drag it back out. The passages children worked were called subsidiary galleries, low, branching channels that split off from the main tunnels and followed the ore veins wherever they went. The main tunnels were cut wide enough for adult slaves to move through in a crouch and for wooden ore carts to travel along their length, but silver and lead did not form in convenient straight lines. The veins twisted sideways and narrowed and dropped at strange angles, and someone had to follow them wherever they led. That task belonged to the smallest workers available. Hanno's day began in full darkness before the surface world had seen any light. He descended into the main shaft alongside other children and adult male slaves, moving in a single line guided only by lamplight, the wooden ladder rungs slick with moisture that seeped through the rock face on all sides. Some of the main shafts at the Hispanian mines descended more than 200 feet into the earth. The ladder was long. The sounds changed as they went deeper. The noise from the surface disappeared, replaced by the creak of timber, the drip of water, and the distant ring of iron against stone from other levels below. At his assigned gallery, Hanno separated from the main group and crawled in alone. He placed his lamp on a small shelf cut into the wall specifically for that purpose and positioned himself in front of the rock face. Then he started swinging the pick. The sound it made was flat and close, completely absorbed by the stone around him, going nowhere. He chipped loose pieces of ore into a wicker basket. When the basket was full, he dragged it backward along the passage by a cord, delivered it to the main tunnel, and went back in. That was the work. That was all of it. Over and over, in the dark, in the heat, in the dust, until the shift ended. The dust was the part no one spoke about because no one had a word for what it was doing. The ore at Carthago Nova was dense with lead, a mineral the Romans called galena, a bright, heavy, silver-grey rock that crumbled under an iron pick into fine grey powder. That powder entered the lungs with every breath. It settled on the skin, coated the inside of the mouth, worked its way into the body through every available surface. Children who worked the lead-heavy galleries for more than a few months began to show signs that the people around them had no language to explain. The skin went pale and waxy. The gums turned a dark grayish color along the line where they met the teeth. The hands developed a tremor that the child could not stop. Confusion came in small moments at first, losing track of a thought, forgetting a simple instruction, and then more frequently. Some children began hearing sounds in the rock that were not there. Some stopped responding to questions the way they had before. No one pulled them out of the galleries. The work continued. The overseers noted the decline in output and began placing orders with the slave markets for replacements. Above ground, the enslaved workers lived in camps pressed close against the mine entrances. The camps were enclosed by walls and watched by overseers. Escape was not a realistic option, and the punishments for attempting it were designed to make that clear to everyone who witnessed them. But the physical barrier was not the deepest form of confinement these children experienced. Roman society had a system for assigning worth to every person within it. Citizens, freedmen, soldiers, craftsmen, merchants, each group held a place that others could recognize. Mine slaves held no such place. Roman legal and administrative texts of that period used a specific term for them, instrumentum vocale, which translated directly as speaking tools, not workers, not people. Tools that happened to be able to receive verbal instructions. When Roman writers described the mines, they discussed output figures, operational efficiency, and profit. They did not describe the individuals performing the labor except in the most functional, inventoried terms. For a child like Hanno, this had a weight that pressed down on him in ways that the work itself did not. The mine was brutal, but it was at least concrete. The rock was solid. The pick was real. The basket had weight. The invisibility was something different. He existed in a world that had made a formal decision that his story was not worth keeping. He had no legal standing, no patron, no community that could advocate for him. He was property that had been assigned a specific function, and that was the totality of what the world around him recognized him to be. The other children in the camp were the only consistent human presence in his life. They came from many places: Iberia, North Africa, the German and Gallic territories the Roman army had swept through, children of slaves already born into bondage who had never known anything else. The ones who had been in the mines for several years had a particular quality about them that newer arrivals noticed immediately: a stillness, a flatness in the expression that did not shift much regardless of what was happening around them. They spoke when necessary and about practical things: which galleries had poor air, which sections of ladder were unsafe, which overseers could be read and which could not. Hanno stopped dreaming about his mother after the second year underground. He was not sure when it happened exactly. He noticed it one morning when he woke before the shift bell and realized that he had dreamed only about the tunnel. Consider what it means for a child to stop dreaming about home. Not because grief has passed or because time has offered healing, but because the daily weight of the work has displaced everything else in the mind that once held tenderness. These children were not destroyed by a single catastrophic event. They were worn down, gradually, by the ordinary accumulation of dark days inside the rock. What does that take from a person, from a child, to reach that point without anyone around them marking the loss? The physical dangers of the work came in two forms: the slow kind and the sudden kind. The slow kind was the laid. The trembling began in the hands. Then came the confusion, short blanks in the middle of a task, where a thought simply stopped and did not continue. Then the stomach pain, the nausea, the legs losing their reliability. Children who displayed these symptoms were not reassigned to lighter work as a matter of care. They were reassigned because they had become less efficient, and efficiency was the only measure that mattered in the record books of the mining operation. The sudden kind was the rock. The subsidiary galleries were not reinforced with the timber support structures that lined the main tunnels. They were cut quickly, following the ore, without the engineering attention that Roman builders applied to structures they intended to use for long periods. The rock above the narrow passages was heavy, and it shifted. Near the end of Hanno's third year working the galleries, a passage collapsed in an adjacent section of the mine. Two adult slaves in the connecting tunnel heard a low crack move through the stone around them, not a sound so much as a change in the feeling of the air, and stepped back toward the main shaft. Two children who had been working inside the subsidiary passage at that moment were not heard from again. The operation resumed that same afternoon. New children were assigned to work around the collapsed area. The foreman marked the section as closed. That was the entirety of the record. In the administrative documents that historians have recovered from the Roman mining districts of Hispania, the accounting is precise and detailed in specific areas. Quantities of ore extracted per season, number of slaves present at the start and end of each work period, tools requisitioned, replacement slaves requested, What those documents do not contain, in any form that has survived, is the individual name of a single child who worked those galleries. The children do not appear in the record as people. They appear only in the gaps, the spaces between one census count and the next, where numbers go down without explanation. Now consider this carefully, because most people who first encounter this detail find it genuinely difficult to process. The lead that children like Hanno extracted from the rock, the galena, the very ore whose dust was destroying their nervous systems with every shift they worked, was transporting from the mines of Hispania to smelting operations across the Roman Empire. There it was melted down and cast into pipes, lead pipes, the fistulae plumbae that carried clean water from Rome's celebrated aqueduct system directly into the homes of Roman citizens. The same substance that entered the children's lungs underground, that turned their gums gray and made their hands shake, was shaped into the physical infrastructure of one of the most admired engineering achievements in the ancient world. Rome pointed to its water system as evidence of its civilization. Clean water reliably delivered to hundreds of thousands of people across dozens of cities. The aqueducts were a source of genuine pride, and at the beginning of the supply chain that made those aqueducts functional, before the pipes were cast, before the water flowed, before any Roman citizen poured a cup, there was a narrow gallery in a hillside in Hispania, and a child with a clay lamp and a small iron pick breathing lead dust in the dark. The Romans did not understand lead toxicity in the clinical terms that modern medicine uses, but the evidence was present in the bodies of the children doing the work. It simply was not considered relevant to anyone who had the authority to change the arrangement. The supply chains of the ancient world were long, and the people at the beginning of them were rarely visible to the people at the end. A Roman citizen drawing water through a lead pipe had no occasion to consider the mines in Hispania. The distance between production and use was wide enough that the connection required no acknowledgement. Does that distance change the nature of the arrangement? Does not knowing the full cost of something, when knowing was entirely possible, had anyone chosen to look, constitute a meaningful separation from responsibility for it? A child who entered the Roman lead mines at the age of 8 could remain productive for somewhere between 3 and 6 years, based on what skeletal evidence and historical documentation together suggest. After that, the accumulated damage to the body, the lead in the bones, the wear on the joints, the deterioration of the nervous system, made the worker unreliable in the ways the operation needed reliability. Some were reassigned to surface tasks that required less precision. These decisions were not made out of consideration for the child. They were made out of consideration for output. A small number of mine slaves from this period survived into their 20s. They were the exception, and the record notes them with the mild surprise of an unusual inventory result. Most vanished from the tallies around the age of 13 or 14, present in one count, absent in the next, with no notation to explain the change. Historians studying burial sites near the ancient mine locations in Hispania have found child remains that display the same pattern of physical damage, stunted bone growth, signs of chronic malnutrition, and the specific skeletal markers of prolonged heavy metal exposure. Those children were identified as children not by any name or inscription or grave marker. They were identified by the size of their bones. Hanno's story ends the way nearly all of their stories end, quietly, without a fixed point, without a cause recorded anywhere. A figure matching his description, a child of approximately 11 years, noted as significantly reduced in output, appears in fragments of administrative record recovered from the mining district, reassigned to surface sorting. Removed from that assignment some 14 months later. No further entry. What followed that removal is not known. He may have died of the illness already working through him. He may have been sold to a different owner willing to use whatever remained of his labor for lighter tasks. He may have simply ceased to appear in any document that anyone thought worth preserving. There is no grave with his name on it. There is no stone marker. The Roman world kept careful records of the silver that came out of the mines of Hispania. It did not keep records of the children who went in. Rome's economy was built on materials that required constant extraction from the earth, and that extraction was performed almost entirely by enslaved people. Silver moved through the empire as currency, holding the entire trading system together. Lead reinforced buildings, sealed ships, weighed scales, and lined the pipes that carried water into private homes. The mines of Hispania were not an outlier in the Roman economic system. They were close to its center. Children were not used in those mines because no adults were available. Children were used because the narrowest galleries required the smallest bodies, and enslaved children cost less to purchase and replace than enslaved adults. It was a calculated arrangement, maintained across generations, and it worked precisely as intended. The Roman citizens who benefited from silver currency and lead water pipes were not unaware that mines existed. They were simply uninterested in the specific mechanics of what happened inside them. The geography helped. Hispania was far from Rome. The camps were enclosed. The children who worked the galleries were not part of any social category that Roman law required anyone to think about with care. The distance was not an accident. It was a structural feature of the system, and it functioned exactly as designed. That particular arrangement, the separation of those who benefit from a material good and those who pay the human cost to produce it, was not invented in ancient Rome. It did not end there either. The mines of Hispania were not the only place in the Roman world where children were assigned work that no adult of any standing would acknowledge in writing. In the cities, in the ports, in the processing operations that turned raw materials into the goods that Roman households used daily, there were tasks given to the small and the powerless because those tasks required someone who could not refuse them. Some of those jobs have been examined by historians. Many have not. The full picture of what daily existence looked like for the children at the very bottom of the Roman social structure is still, in many places, buried, not deep. Just far enough underground that no one has gone looking yet.